"This coffee is terrible as usual," she said, not bothering to look up from her phone. "I don't know why you can't buy better brands. James always has the best coffee in his office." The name hung in the air between us. James Thompson, her boss. The man whose messages I'd discovered on our shared iPad last night when Sarah forgot to disable her notifications. The man who'd been sleeping with my wife for the past 3 months. James Thompson. I kept my voice neutral as I glanced at my own phone, where I'd saved screenshots of their conversations. "How is he these days?" Sarah's perfectly plucked eyebrows drew together slightly. "Fine. Busy with the merger, you know how it is." She waved her hand dismissively, but I noticed how her fingers tightened around her coffee cup. "The merger." I nodded slowly. "The one that requires all those late-night meetings at the Grand Hotel?" The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. "You've been spying on me?" I almost laughed at the accusation. "Spying? Sarah, you left your hotel receipts in your coat pocket. The same coat I took to the dry cleaners last week because you were too busy with your meetings. You had no right to go through my things." Her voice rose an octave, that familiar defensive tone I'd heard more and more lately. "Just like you had no right to share confidential client information with James?" I placed my phone on the counter, turning it so she could see the email chain I'd discovered. "I wonder what HR would think about that." Sarah's hand trembled as she set down her coffee cup. "You don't understand anything about business, Michael. James and I are working on something important. Something bigger than your small-minded middle management mentality could ever grasp." "Something bigger?" I pulled out the first document from the folder I'd prepared. "Like the lawsuit James faced from his last secretary? The one he promised to leave his wife for." I slid another paper across the granite countertop. "Or maybe like the settlement he paid to the junior analyst before that?" That's different," Sarah stammered. But her eyes kept darting to the papers, to the evidence of James's pattern laid out in black and white. "We're in love. He's leaving Patricia. We have plans." "Plans?" I echoed. "Like the plans you discussed in these emails?" I pulled out another printout. "The ones where you strategized how to force me out of Sterling Financial. Once Michael's gone, we can restructure the department. James says he can make sure Michael's reputation is ruined in the industry." I quoted from memory, watching her face contort with recognition. "You're twisting everything." Sarah's voice cracked. "James would never." "Never what, Sarah? Never lie? Never manipulate?" I pulled out my tablet and played a recording, James's voice crystal clear as he spoke to another woman, making the same promises he'd made to Sarah. The recording was from just 2 days ago. Sarah's legs seemed to give out, and she sank into one of our kitchen chairs. "Where did you get that?" "It turns out Patricia, James's wife, has known about his affairs for months. She hired a private investigator. When I reached out to her law firm yesterday, they were quite interested in adding your emails to their evidence file." I paused, letting that sink in. "Especially the ones about client information." "You're bluffing?" Sarah whispered, but her face had taken on an ashen quality. I pulled out my final piece of evidence, a formal letter from Sterling Financial's compliance department, requesting Sarah's presence at a disciplinary hearing that morning. "Am I?" Sarah's phone buzzed on the counter. Then again, and again. I didn't need to look to know what was happening. The system-wide security audit I'd quietly requested last week would be flagging every confidential document she'd shared with James. "Get out," she suddenly snarled, rising from the chair with such force it toppled backward. "Get out, you cheap trash. I'm moving in with James. He'll protect me. He'll fix this." I calmly gathered my evidence back into the folder. "James is in a meeting right now with the board of directors. They're discussing the unauthorized access to client files that was discovered this morning. I imagine he's quite busy explaining how client information ended up in his private email." As if on cue, Sarah's phone lit up with a message from James. "Don't come in today. Lawyers advise no contact." "You?" Sarah's voice shook with rage and fear. "You planned this. All of it. You're not supposed to be capable of this. You're supposed to be..." "What? Weak? Passive? Content to count other people's money? I smiled without humor. You know, Sarah, that's the funny thing about risk analysts. We're very good at seeing patterns, documenting evidence, and understanding consequences. It's literally what Sterling Financial pays me to do. Her phone buzzed again. An urgent email from HR marked, "Immediate action required." "You should probably respond to that," I said quietly, picking up my briefcase. They don't like to be kept waiting in cases involving security breaches. "Michael, wait." Sarah's voice had lost its edge, replaced by something closer to panic. "We can talk about this. We can fix this." I paused at the kitchen door, looking back at our granite countertops, our designer appliances, all the trappings of success she'd been so focused on lately. "You know what your biggest mistake was, Sarah? It wasn't the affair. It wasn't even the security breaches. It was underestimating me. You were so busy looking down on my career choices. You never bothered to understand what I actually do." I opened the door, then added, "Oh, and Sarah? The coffee isn't terrible. You're just used to the overpriced brand James buys to impress clients. The same clients whose information you helped him steal. I prefer to keep things simple. Less chance of leaving a bitter taste." The door closed behind me on her strangled sob. My phone buzzed with a message from Patricia Thompson's lawyer, confirming our meeting that afternoon. Another from Sterling Financial's compliance department, acknowledging receipt of my evidence. And finally, one from my realtor, confirming that the new apartment was ready. I'd spent 3 months watching my marriage crumble, gathering evidence, and preparing for this moment. Now all that was left was to watch as Sarah and James faced the consequences of their choices. Not through dramatic confrontations or public humiliation, but through the quiet, inexorable machinery of corporate policy and legal procedure. As I drove to work, rain still tapping against the windows, I felt nothing but a calm certainty. Sarah wanted to believe I was weak because I preferred stability to flash, substance to style. She never understood that true power isn't about designer clothes or luxury coffee brands. Sarah had kicked me out, calling me cheap trash, but she was about to learn an expensive lesson about underestimating quiet men who understand the value of documentation. The HR meeting wasn't what I expected. As I sat in the sterile conference room, watching Sarah's career implode through the glass walls, something unexpected happened. Patricia Thompson, James's wife, walked in, carrying a thick manila envelope. "I hope you don't mind me joining," she said, her voice carrying the polished edge of old money. "I believe what I'm about to share concerns both our situations." The HR director, Margaret Chen, raised an eyebrow but nodded. Sarah, who'd been in the middle of trying to explain away her misunderstood emails, went completely still. Patricia placed a USB drive on the table. "3 days ago, I discovered something interesting in my husband's private safe. Not just evidence of his affair with Sarah. That was old news, but something far more concerning." She turned to me. "Mr. Walker, did you know that your wife and my husband were planning to embezzle nearly $12 million from Sterling Financial's client accounts?" The room went silent. Even I hadn't seen this coming. "That's ridiculous," Sarah laughed, but her hands were shaking. "James would never." "James would and James did," Patricia interrupted, sliding forward a stack of documents. 3 times before with 3 different companies. He always used the same method: seduce an employee with access to client information, manipulate them into helping him move funds through a series of shell companies, then leave them to take the fall when the transfers were discovered. Margaret Chun was already scanning the documents, her professional composure cracking slightly. "These are very serious allegations, Mrs. Thompson." "They're not allegations." Patricia's voice was steel. "They're documented facts. The FBI has been building a case against James for months. I've been working with them, gathering evidence." She turned to Sarah. "You weren't special, dear. You were just the next in line. The only difference is, this time James got sloppy. He didn't realize his wife had finally had enough." Sarah's face had gone from pale to gray. "You're lying. James loves me. We have plans." "Plans?" Patricia pulled out her phone and played a recording. James's voice filled the room, Of course I'm not leaving Patricia. Do you know how much of my assets are tied up in her family's trust? Sarah's just like the others, desperate to believe she's special. Once we move the funds, she'll take the fall, just like Caroline did at Morgan Stanley. I watched my wife's world collapse in real time, but Patricia wasn't finished. The FBI is executing a search warrant at James's office right now, she continued calmly. They're also freezing several accounts, including one opened in your name last month, Sarah. Did you know about that account? The one with your signature on it. Sarah's eyes widened in horror. He said it was for our future. For the house we were going to buy. The house in the Cayman Islands? Patricia's smile was cold. The same house he promised to Caroline? And Amanda before her. Margaret Chin stood up. I need to contact our legal department immediately. Mrs. Walker, please don't leave the building. She paused at the door. And Mrs. Thompson? The FBI may want to speak with our compliance team. After she left, Patricia turned to me. I apologize for not telling you everything earlier, Mr. Walker. The FBI asked me to keep certain details confidential until they were ready to move. I nodded slowly, still processing. How long have you known? About James's affairs? Years. About the fraud? Since Caroline. I was done being silent, watching him destroy lives. She gathered her documents. Your wife may have betrayed you, Mr. Walker, but she's also a victim of James's manipulation. The FBI agent in charge suggested that if she cooperates fully, they might consider that during sentencing. Sarah made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Sentencing? I never meant. Intent doesn't matter much with wire fraud, Patricia said quietly. The transfers from client accounts have your digital signature. James made sure of that. As if on cue, we heard a commotion in the hallway. Through the glass walls, we could see FBI agents escorting James Thompson through the office in handcuffs. He caught sight of us in the conference room and his face contorted with rage. You betrayed me, he mouthed at Patricia. No, James, she replied, even though he couldn't hear her. You betrayed yourself. Sarah collapsed into her chair, tears streaming down her face. Michael, she whispered. I didn't know. You have to believe me. I didn't know what he was really doing. I looked at my wife, this woman I'd loved for 12 years, who'd been so eager to throw our life away for a man who saw her as nothing more than a convenient tool for his crimes. I believe you didn't know about the fraud, I said finally. But you knew you were betraying me. You knew you were sharing client information. You knew what you were doing was wrong. But you did it anyway because you wanted to believe in James's promises. The FBI will want to speak with both of you, Patricia said, standing. I suggest you each contact separate lawyers. She paused at the door. And Sarah? James has used this exact same scheme in 3 states. He's very convincing, very charming. You're not the first woman to fall for it. But you might be the last. After she left, Sarah and I sat in silence, watching through the glass walls as FBI agents boxed up files and hard drives from James's office. I destroyed everything, Sarah whispered. Our marriage, my career, my freedom, all for a man who was just using me. Yes, I said quietly. You did. Her phone buzzed, another message from James. His last message, sent just before his arrest. Sorry, baby, but business is business. I'm sure you understand. Sarah stared at the message, then looked up at me with tears in her eyes. I kicked you out, called you cheap trash. And all this time I was trying to protect you. I finished. Not from the affair, you chose that, but from what I suspected James was really doing. I just didn't realize how deep it went. Through the glass, we could see Margaret Chen returning with 2 FBI agents. Sarah's hands were trembling as she wiped her eyes. What happens now? She asked. Now? I stood up, straightening my unremarkable tie. Now you talk to the FBI. You tell them everything. And then you call a good criminal defense lawyer. I gathered my things. I'll have my attorney contact you about the divorce. Michael, wait. You know what the saddest part is, Sarah? You thought James was better than me because he wore expensive suits and bought premium coffee. But in the end, he's going to prison for stealing money, while I made mine the honest way, by being exactly what you despised. A careful, methodical, boring risk analyst who understands the value of documentation. The FBI agents entered the room as I reached the door. The last thing I heard was Sarah's broken whisper. I threw away a good man for a criminal. Yes, I thought as I walked away. Yes, you did. But at least now she knew exactly what her choices had cost her. And as I stepped into the elevator, my phone buzzed with a message from my lawyer. Patricia Thompson's evidence changes everything. Sarah's involvement in the fraud scheme will make the divorce proceedings much simpler. I smiled slightly. Sometimes justice doesn't come from dramatic confrontations or elaborate revenge. Sometimes it comes from simply letting people face the natural consequences of their own choices. And Sarah's choices were about to cost her everything. 2 weeks after James Thompson's arrest, I sat in my new apartment, reviewing the latest revelations with my lawyer. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting striped shadows across the stack of documents on my coffee table. Each page revealed a new layer of deception that made my marriage's collapse seem almost trivial in comparison. The FBI found something interesting in Sarah's office, David Chun said, sliding a photograph across the table. Hidden behind the false bottom of her desk drawer. I picked up the photo. It showed a small USB drive and what looked like a burner phone. She always said I was paranoid about cybersecurity, I said quietly. You weren't paranoid enough, David replied, pulling out more documents. That drive contained something the FBI's forensic team found fascinating, a complete blueprint of Sterling Financial's network architecture, including all the backdoors James had installed over the years. I felt my stomach turn. How long? According to the timestamps, Sarah began collecting network information 6 months ago, 3 months before the affair even started. David's expression was grim. James approached her first as a mentor, grooming her for both the affair and the fraud. He knew exactly what he was doing. My phone buzzed, a message from Patricia Thompson. Need to meet. Found something in James's personal email. It's about Sarah. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Patricia's study, watching her pace in front of a wall of family photos she hadn't taken down yet. I've been going through everything, she said, gesturing to her laptop, trying to understand the full scope of James's operations. And then I found these. She turned the screen toward me. What I saw made my blood run cold. Emails, dozens of them, between Sarah and James, from 2 years ago. This wasn't their first affair, Patricia said quietly. They had a brief relationship right after Sarah joined Sterling Financial. Before she even met you. I stared at the dates, my mind racing back. That's impossible. Sarah and I met at a company party. She had just been hired.
No, Patricia interrupted gently.
She had been working there for 6 months. The party where you met, it wasn't a coincidence. James had already ended their affair, but he saw potential in her. He saw someone he could manipulate later. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the emails. Are you saying? Your entire marriage was part of James's long game, Patricia confirmed. He wanted someone he could trust inside Sterling Financial's risk management division. Someone who could help him avoid detection. He ended things with Sarah but encouraged her to pursue you. The perfect setup, a risk analyst who would never suspect his own wife. The room seemed to spin. All those years, all those memories. Had any of it been real? My phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. Mr. Walker, this is Special Agent Rebecca Torres. We need to talk about your wife's involvement in a series of transactions from 2018. I showed the message to Patricia. She nodded grimly. They found the offshore accounts. All of them. The next morning, I sat in a federal building, listening as Agent Torres laid out a conspiracy that went far beyond a simple affair or financial fraud. James Thompson didn't just steal from his employers, she explained, spreading photographs across the table. He created an elaborate network of compromised employees across multiple financial institutions. Your wife wasn't just another victim. She was one of his most valuable assets. The photos showed Sarah at various events over the years, always in the background, always watching. Banking conferences, industry meetups, charity galas. We believe she was spotting potential targets for James, Agent Torres continued, identifying vulnerable employees who could be manipulated into providing access to their company's systems. But why? I asked, my voice hollow. She had a good career, a comfortable life. Power, Patricia interjected from her seat in the corner. James offered them all the same thing, the illusion of being part of something bigger than themselves. The rush of outsmarting everyone around them. Agent Torres nodded. Mrs. Thompson has been invaluable in helping us understand James's methodology. The affairs were just one part of it. He was building a network of compromised insiders across the entire financial sector. My phone lit up with a notification, an email from Sarah's private account, one I didn't even know existed. The subject line, "I'm sorry you had to find out this way." With trembling fingers, I opened it. Michael, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Not running, that's pointless now. But I couldn't face you after everything that's come out. You weren't supposed to be anything more than an assignment. A way to gain access to Sterling Financial's risk management systems. But somewhere along the way, I made a terrible mistake. I fell in love with you. Really loved you. That's why I grew so angry, so contemptuous of your careful, honest way of living. Because every time I looked at you, I saw everything I'd sacrificed for James's grand plans. Every time you talked about integrity and doing things the right way, it was like a knife in my heart. The affair wasn't about love or attraction. It was about trying to kill whatever part of me had grown to love what you represented. Because James was threatening to expose everything if I didn't help him with this final scheme. I know it doesn't matter now. Nothing I say can undo what I've done. But you deserve to know that the one real thing in all of this was how much I grew to love you. And how much I hated myself for it. Goodbye, Sarah. The silence in the room was deafening. Agent Torres cleared her throat softly. Mrs. Walker left this letter with her attorney this morning, along with a complete confession and detailed records of every operation she participated in. She surrendered herself to federal custody an hour ago. Patricia reached over and squeezed my hand. I know what you're feeling right now. Finding out your whole marriage was built on a lie. It breaks something inside you that can never be fully repaired. I stared at the evidence spread across the table, the photos, the emails, the transaction records, the carefully documented destruction of my life. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Agent Torres gathered her files. Mrs. Walker's cooperation will be taken into consideration, but given the scope of the conspiracy, she's looking at significant federal time. We'll need you to testify about certain aspects of the case. I nodded numbly. And James? Going away for a very long time, Patricia said with grim satisfaction. His lawyers are already talking plea deal, but with the evidence we have now. My phone buzzed one final time. A message from Sarah's lawyer. She wanted you to know. She's naming names. All of them. Every person James compromised, every scheme they ran. She says it's the only way she can think of to prove that loving you changed her. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of everything crushing down on me. My marriage hadn't just ended. It had never really existed. It was all part of an elaborate financial fraud scheme that had finally, spectacularly imploded. And somewhere in a federal holding cell, the woman I'd loved, the woman who'd been sent to destroy me but claimed to have fallen in love instead, was finally telling the truth. The only question was, could I ever believe her again? 6 months passed like a blur after Sarah's arrest. While she and James faced federal charges, I threw myself into my work at Sterling Financial, channeling my pain into something productive. The countless hours I'd spent meticulously analyzing patterns and studying market behaviors were about to pay off in ways Sarah never could have imagined. It started with a crisis in the Asian markets. While other analysts panicked, I spotted a pattern in the chaos, something I'd been quietly researching for months. I drafted a comprehensive risk mitigation strategy and sent it directly to the board of directors. This is remarkable, Chairman Victor Reynolds said during an emergency meeting. How long have you been developing this approach? 3 years, I replied, spreading the documentation across the boardroom table. I tried sharing it with James Thompson several times, but he said it was too conservative. The board members exchanged knowing looks. James's aggressive investment strategies had nearly cost them billions before his arrest. My methodical, data-driven approach was exactly what they needed. Implement it immediately, Victor ordered. And Michael, clear your calendar. We'll need you to oversee this personally. Over the next few months, my strategy not only protected Sterling Financial from the market downturn, but helped our clients profit from it. The same careful attention to detail that Sarah had mocked as boring saved our biggest accounts millions of dollars. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from other financial institutions, all wanting to know how we'd predicted the crisis. Industry publications started calling for interviews. The Wall Street Journal ran a profile calling me the new face of risk management. Mr. Walker? My new assistant Emma knocked on my office door one morning. The executive committee would like to see you. I straightened my tie, no longer the cheap polyester blend Sarah had criticized, but a subtle Armani that cost more than my old monthly salary. Success had changed my wardrobe, but not my principles. In the boardroom, Chairman Reynolds didn't waste time with pleasantries. Michael, your risk mitigation strategy has transformed our entire approach to global markets. Our clients are asking for you specifically. He slid a folder across the table. We're creating a new division, Global Risk Innovation. We want you to run it. I opened the folder. The salary figure made my eyes widen. It was 3 times what James Thompson had been making. There's more, Victor continued. The position comes with a seat on the board and equity partnership. We need someone with your integrity and insight helping to guide this company's future. As I walked back to my office, soon to be relocated to the executive floor, I passed Sarah's old desk. It sat empty, a silent reminder of how quickly things can change. My phone buzzed with a notification from my real estate agent. My offer on the penthouse apartment had been accepted. The same penthouse James had always bragged about wanting but could never quite afford. Life had changed dramatically since that morning in my kitchen when Sarah had sneered at my coffee choices. While she sat in a federal detention center and James faced decades in prison, I had transformed my reputation in the industry. The careful, methodical qualities they had despised became the foundation of my success. I'd also started investing in tech startups, using my understanding of risk to spot opportunities others missed. 3 of my investments had already gone public, multiplying my net worth several times over. The financial magazines that once featured James's flashy investment strategies now analyzed my conservative but consistently successful approach. That evening, as I stood in my new penthouse overlooking the city, my phone buzzed with an alert from the federal prison system. Sarah was being released early for cooperation. I poured myself a glass of scotch, the same premium brand James used to brag about, though now I could afford the entire distillery if I wanted it. On my kitchen counter sat a small frame containing the coffee receipt from my old apartment, the last one Sarah had complained about before our confrontation. I'd kept it as a reminder that success doesn't change who you are. It reveals it. My phone buzzed again, another investment opportunity, this time in a small coffee company that specialized in premium beans. I smiled at the irony as I made a note to buy a controlling stake. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about rising so far above your enemies that they can't reach you anymore. But as I looked out over the city lights, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. Sarah's early release meant she would soon learn about my success, about how the cheap trash she'd kicked out had become more wealthy and respected than James ever was. I picked up my phone and called my security team. Something told me I'd be needing them soon. After all, I hadn't just survived Sarah and James's betrayal, I'd thrived because of it. And I had a feeling Sarah wouldn't take that news well at all. The question wasn't if she would show up, but when. And this time I would be ready. The morning Sarah walked back into my life, I was reviewing acquisition papers for her family's mortgage company. Not out of revenge. I'd learned that true power comes from helping others, not destroying them. I planned to restructure their loans, make them more manageable. Success had taught me compassion, something Sarah and James never understood. Mr. Walker? Emma's voice crackled over the intercom. There's a situation in the lobby. Through my office surveillance feed, I watched Sarah arguing with security. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect manicure. Prison had stripped away her polished exterior, but her eyes still held that familiar manipulative gleam. Let her up, I said quietly. But keep security on standby. Minutes later, Sarah stood in my doorway, taking in the view from what used to be James's corner office. Her eyes darted from the original paintings to the subtle signs of wealth, all earned honestly, unlike her schemes with James. I was released early for cooperation, she said, stepping inside without invitation. I thought we could. Her voice trailed off as she noticed the Wall Street Journal on my desk, her face paling at the headline. Sterling Financial's rising star acquires major tech portfolio. How did you? She started. Get rich. I finished, standing to pour myself a coffee from my private bar. By being exactly what you despised, careful, methodical, and honest. I gestured to the Italian coffee maker. Would you like some? Is that premium brand you always preferred? Funny how success tastes better when you earn it. Sarah sank into a visitor's chair. I heard rumors in prison, but I didn't believe. They say you're worth more than James ever was. More than James ever claimed to be, I corrected. Most of his wealth was smoke and mirrors. Unlike him, I actually earned mine. I sat back down, studying her. But that's not why you're here, is it? She leaned forward, eyes suddenly bright with tears. Michael, I've changed. Prison gave me time to think, to realize what I threw away. We could start over. Could we? I pressed a button on my desk, and the wall screen came to life. Security footage played. Sarah meeting with James's former associates just yesterday. Starting over usually doesn't involve meeting with known financial criminals the day after your release. The color drained from her face. How did you know? I smiled slightly. Sarah, I'm head of global risk innovation now. Did you really think I wouldn't monitor potential threats? I opened a drawer and pulled out a file. They offered you a job, didn't they? A chance to rebuild your old network. I was going to tell you. No, you weren't. I placed a USB drive on the desk. This contains evidence of every contact you've made since your release. Every phone call, every meeting. I'm not the same man you married, Sarah. The one you thought you could manipulate. Sarah's facade cracked. You think you're better than me now? Just because you got lucky? Lucky. I pressed another button, and my office door closed silently. The night you kicked me out calling me cheap trash, I made a decision. Instead of letting your betrayal destroy me, I used it. Every criticism you and James made about my methods, they became the foundation of my success. I stood walking to the window. While you and James chased quick profits and glamour, I built something real. Something lasting. I turned back to her. And now you're here, thinking you can manipulate me again. Because you never understood that real power isn't about designer clothes or premium coffee. It's about integrity. Sarah stood, her prison-worn hands trembling. I don't need your lectures. I came here to con me, I interrupted quietly. Just like you tried to con my security team downstairs. Just like you conned me into marriage. I pressed the intercom. Emma, please come in. Emma entered, holding a manila envelope. Inside were documents showing Sarah's recent activities, including her attempts to access my financial records. These are cease and desist orders, I explained. My lawyers have already contacted your parole officer. You're not allowed within 500 feet of me or any Sterling Financial property. Sarah's face contorted with familiar rage. You can't do this. You're still the same weak, pathetic. Security, I said calmly into the intercom. As two guards appeared, I turned back to Sarah. I've already arranged to restructure your family's mortgages. They'll be able to keep their homes with lower payments. Consider it my final gift to the woman I once loved. Why? She whispered, confusion replacing anger. Why help them after everything? Because success without compassion is just another form of failure. Something you and James never understood. I nodded to the security guards. Please escort Ms. Walker out. And Sarah? Don't come back. Next time, the evidence goes to your parole officer. As she was led away, I heard her whisper, I really did love you, in my way. I know, I replied softly. That's what makes this all so tragic. After she was gone, I sat at my desk, looking at the framed coffee receipt I'd kept all this time. Next to it now sat a new frame, the magazine cover featuring my success story. From cheap coffee to corporate triumph, from betrayed husband to industry leader. My phone buzzed with a message from my realtor. The papers were ready for my newest acquisition, a small but growing coffee shop chain. The same brand Sarah used to mock me for not buying. Soon, it would become the official supplier for Sterling Financial's offices worldwide. I smiled, thinking of how life had come full circle. Sarah had kicked me out, calling me cheap trash. But in doing so, she'd forced me to discover my true worth. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about becoming the person your enemies never believed you could be. And as I sat in my corner office, drinking premium coffee I could now buy by the warehouse, I realized that success isn't just about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. The security feed showed Sarah leaving the building, looking back one last time at the empire she could have shared. If only she'd believed in honest success instead of glamorous fraud. I turned back to my work, to my honestly earned success, to the future I'd built from the ashes of her betrayal. After all, I had a board meeting to prepare for. We were about to acquire another company. One that James had always dreamed of owning but could never afford. Sometimes karma doesn't need our help. It just needs us to succeed honestly, methodically, and completely. And that's exactly what I had done. Thank you for listening to the story to the end. Let me know in the comments if you think you would have done the same. It's really important to me. Don't forget to like this story so we know you like it, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our new videos. And the next story will be even more interesting. There's a twist that will definitely surprise you. So turn on your notifications and stay tuned. See you in the next story.